In 1947, India became independent with an air force built entirely from British leftovers. Aging World War II aircraft, hand-me-down training planes, and a handful of pilots who had learned to fly under the RAF. That was the Indian Air Force at birth. Hawker Tempest, the inherited warriors. The Hawker Tempest was one of the finest British fighters of World War II, fast, heavily armed, and capable of operating at low level where the Spitfire struggled. India inherited Tempests from the RAF and flew them in the First Kashmir War of 1947-48, using them for ground attack and close air support missions in terrain that tested the limits of what the aircraft could do. The Tempest was a World War II aircraft fighting an Indian war, the first of many hand-me-downs that the Indian Air Force would receive before finding its own identity. De Havilland Vampires, India's first jet. India became one of the first Asian nations to operate jet aircraft when it acquired the de Havilland Vampire in 1948. The Vampire was a simple, reliable first-generation jet fighter, not exceptional by any measure, but an important step in converting the Indian Air Force from piston engines to jets. More significantly, India later manufactured the Vampire under license at Hindustan Aeronautics, limited the first step toward building India's own aviation industry. Hawker Hunter, the elegant fighter. The Hawker Hunter was one of the most beautiful aircraft ever built and one of the most capable fighters of the 1950s. India acquired Hunters in the mid-1950s, and they became the backbone of the Indian Air Force for over a decade, serving through the 1965 war with Pakistan, where they proved their worth in air-to-air combat and ground attack missions. Indian Hunter pilots flying over the Rann of Kutch in 1965 scored kills against Pakistani Sabres in engagements that demonstrated the Hunter's superiority in a turning fight at low altitude. English Electric Canberra, the high-altitude bomber. The Canberra gave India something it had never previously had: a high-altitude jet bomber capable of striking targets deep inside enemy territory. It served in the 1965 and 1971 wars with Pakistan, flying night bombing missions that demonstrated India's ability to project air power beyond the immediate battlefield. The Canberra remained in Indian service until 2007, nearly 50 years, making it one of the longest-serving aircraft in IAF history. Folland Gnat, the Pakistan killer. This is the aircraft that made India's Air Force famous. The Folland Gnat was a tiny, lightweight fighter so small that Pakistani pilots nicknamed it the Sabre Slayer, after Indian Gnats repeatedly shot down the much larger and supposedly superior American-supplied F-86 Sabres in the 1965 war. The Gnat was fast, incredibly maneuverable, and difficult to see at a distance, all advantages in the close-range dogfights that characterized the 1965 air war over Pakistan. In the 1971 war, Gnat scored further kills, cementing their reputation as one of the most effective light fighters of the Cold War era. The Gnat was later developed into the HAL Ajit, an upgraded version built in India, and it became the first domestically improved aircraft in IAF service. Dassault Mystère Roman 4. France enters the picture. India's acquisition of the Dassault Mystère Roman 4 in the mid-1950s marked the beginning of a relationship with France that continues to this day, most recently with the Rafale. The Mystère Roman 4 was a swept-wing transonic fighter that gave India a genuine air superiority capability, comparable to anything Pakistan was flying at the time. It fought in the 1965 war and performed well, establishing India's pattern of diversifying its aircraft sources between Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and the United States to avoid dependence on any single supply. HAL HF-24 Marut, India's first indigenous fighter. The HF-24 Marut, Sanskrit for God of the Storm Winds, was India's first attempt to design and build its own supersonic fighter. Developed with the help of German engineer Kurt Tank, the same man who designed the Focke-Wulf FW-190, the Marut was an ambitious project that partially succeeded and partially failed. It was genuinely supersonic, reasonably well-armed, and flew in combat in the 1971 war against Pakistan, making India one of only a handful of nations to have flown a domestically designed fighter in combat. The problem was the engine. India could not develop a suitable power plant, and the aircraft was always underpowered, limiting its performance below what the airframe was capable of. The Marut was retired in 1990, a brave attempt that proved India could design a modern fighter, but not yet build the engines to make it truly competitive. MiG-21, the Soviet era. The aircraft that defined a generation. In the early 1960s, India made a decision that would define its air force for the next 50 years. It turned to the Soviet Union. The MiG-21 entered Indian service in 1963 and became the most important aircraft in IAF history. India operated over 800 MiG-21s across multiple variants, manufactured them under license at HAL, and flew them in combat in 1965, 1971, and as recently as 2019, when an Indian MiG-21 shot down a Pakistani F-16 over Kashmir in what became one of the most debated air combat incidents of the 21st century. The MiG-21 gave India supersonic capability, genuine air superiority performance, and a manufacturing base for jet fighters that transformed HAL into a serious aerospace company. It also killed a lot of pilots. India's MiG-21 fleet earned a grim nickname, the Flying Coffin, due to accident rates that reflected both the aircraft's demanding handling characteristics and maintenance challenges over decades of service. The last Indian MiG-21 were retired in 2025, over 60 years of continuous service. MiG-23, the variable sweep fighter. The MiG-23 brought India a new capability, variable sweep wings, that could be adjusted in flight for different speed regimes, giving the aircraft better performance at both low and high speeds than a fixed-wing design. In Indian service, it was used primarily as an interceptor, tasked with defending Indian airspace against high-altitude threats. It was never as beloved as the MiG-21 and was phased out in the 1990s without the combat record that made its predecessor famous. MiG-25 Foxbat, the world's fastest fighter. The MiG-25 was not a dogfighter. It was a missile with a cockpit designed to fly faster than any aircraft that could be sent to intercept it. India operated a small fleet of MiG-25 reconnaissance variants that flew at speeds exceeding Mach 2.8 and altitudes above 70,000 feet, effectively untouchable by any air defense system Pakistan or China could field. These aircraft flew reconnaissance missions over Pakistan so fast and so high that Pakistani F-16s scrambled to intercept them could not get close. MiG-27, the ground attack specialist. Where the MiG-23 was an interceptor, the MiG-27 was a dedicated ground attack aircraft designed to destroy targets on the ground rather than engage other fighters. India manufactured the MiG-27 under license as the HAL Bahadur, and it flew in the Kargil War of 1999, striking Pakistani positions in the high-altitude mountains of Kashmir. It was retired in 2019 after 4 decades of service. MiG-29s, India's air superiority fighter. The MiG-29 brought India a genuine 4th-generation air superiority fighter, an aircraft designed from the ground up to defeat the most capable Western fighters of the 1980s. In Indian service, the MiG-29 was upgraded multiple times, eventually receiving new engines, modern avionics, and beyond visual range missile capability that made it competitive with aircraft decades newer. India also operates MiG-29K, the carrier variant from its aircraft carrier INS Vikramaditya, giving the Indian Navy a shipborne fighter capability it had never previously possessed. SEPECAT Jaguar, the strike aircraft. The SEPECAT Jaguar was a joint British-French design acquired by India in the 1970s as a dedicated strike aircraft optimized for delivering weapons against ground targets rather than air-to-air combat. India manufactured Jaguars under license at HAL and continuously upgraded them with Israeli avionics, new engines, and modern weapons systems. The Indian Jaguar flew in the Kargil War and continued in service until very recently, another example of India's approach of buying aircraft and then upgrading them far beyond their original specification. Mirage 2000, the Kargil war hero, the aircraft that won Kargil. If one aircraft defined India's victory in the Kargil War of 1999, it was the Mirage 2000, when Pakistani forces occupied Indian positions high in the Himalayan mountains at altitudes above 15,000 feet terrain, where most aircraft struggle to operate effectively. It was Indian Mirage 2000s that delivered laser-guided bombs with the precision needed to dislodge fortified positions on mountain peaks. The Mirage 2000 performance in Kargil was so impressive that India subsequently upgraded its fleet and ordered additional aircraft. And when India needed a new fighter in the 2010, it turned again to France. The Mirage 2000 is still in Indian service today. Sukhoi Su-30 MKI, India's most powerful fighter. The Su-30 MKI is the most capable aircraft in India's current inventory, and one of the most capable fighters in Asia. Developed specifically for India in collaboration with Russia, the MKI variant features thrust vectoring engines that give it maneuverability beyond any other production fighter. Israeli and French avionics integrated with Russian airframes, and Indian-developed systems that make it genuinely unique. India manufactures Su-30 MKIs under license at HAL over 270, have been built, and continues to upgrade them with new weapons and sensors. In terms of raw capability, the Su-30 MKI is comparable to the American F-15 and superior to almost everything flying in Pakistan or China's tactical aircraft inventory. HAL Tejas. India finally gets it right. The HAL Tejas is the successor to everything India learned from the Marut program 4 decades earlier, and the contrast is dramatic. A lightweight, highly maneuverable delta-wing fighter with fly-by-wire controls, modern avionics, and a combat-proven airframe, the Tejas entered Indian Air Force service in 2016 after a development program that took longer than anyone hoped. The delays were frustrating. The result was worth it. The Tejas Mk1A, the current production variant, features an active electronically scanned array radar, electronic warfare systems, and beyond visual range missile capability that makes it a genuinely competitive lightweight fighter. India plans to build over 180 Tejas aircraft, and several countries have expressed interest in purchasing it for export, a remarkable achievement for a nation that struggled to get the Marut's engines rigged. Dassault Rafale, the most advanced fighter India has ever flown. In 2016, after a decade-long procurement process that became one of the most politically controversial defense deals in Indian history, India signed a contract for 36 Rafale fighters from France. The first Rafales arrived in India in 2020. By 2021, they were flying combat patrols along the line of actual control India's contested border with China, in what was the most direct possible signal of India's intent to its most significant military rival. The Rafale India received is not a standard export variant. India negotiated India-specific enhancements, stronger engines for high-altitude performance in the Himalayas, Israeli helmet-mounted displays, and unique electronic warfare systems, making the Indian Rafale a more capable aircraft than the French Air Force's own version in some respects. The Rafale is the peak of Indian fighter aviation today, but it may not be the peak for long.